Hi, my name is Zoe Kerr. I am a filmmaker and screenwriter. I specialize in horror, but I love writing weird genre pieces that center complicated women.
Welcome to Scratch Claw Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Joe Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go. Yeah, you have a very interesting resume, and also watching some of your short films, or some of your stuff that's up on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's definitely a little bit different than your kind of run-of-the-mill shorts.
Yeah, well, I was so to give background, a lot of my shorts on YouTube are like experimental dance shorts. So narrative still, but wordless and told through movement. And a lot of that stems from having a background as a dancer. I was a ballerina off and on for over 10 years when I was younger. So I love movement and I love dance. And when I was first getting into filmmaking and making shorts and directing and all of that, I felt like wordless storytelling was the thing that I felt most comfortable tackling because it was the thing that I knew the best at that point. And over the years, it's gotten a lot easier to tackle actual narrative storytelling when it comes to adding dialogue and all of that. But yeah, for a while there, I did just love wordless dance storytelling.
Yeah, I saw that you had a background in movement and like physical theater as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been working with a movement theater company called Prism Movement Theater out of Dallas for about 5 or 6 years at this point. And I worked as still working as their head of new works development. So I work with our playwrights, who are typically people who have never written a play before. Usually we just go to them with concepts and ask them to come up with something. It's a lot harder than you may think to write a wordless show. You got to come up with a lot of interesting ways of presenting stuff through words and prose that may not be immediately apparent to dancers. So I basically come in and help them figure out how they want to tell their story.
So your type of movement theater is specifically without any dialogue. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. The company has shifted considerably over the last like 5 or 6 years to where originally it was like completely wordless, no exceptions. And that worked out really, really well for us. But then during the pandemic, we produced a drive-in theater show that I wrote. And it was called Everything Will Be Fine. And we kind of realized that we needed dialogue because, it's different being in a room with 50 other people. And, you can kind of get the sense just in person how someone is expressing and feeling. But when you're doing it through a car windshield, it's suddenly, and you're like 20 feet away from them, it suddenly gets a lot harder to tell a story in a coherent way. So what we ended up doing was we wrote some very short voiceover excerpts that our actors would record at home and then bring in, and we would just pipe them through car speakers. We had a little FM speaker, I guess, and we would do that. And then from there, we were like, oh, this actually could work for us.
That sounds like a really interesting concept for a show. I like that. I used to work for a movement and dance theater company in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is a very strong community of movement theater and device theater.
Yeah.
But it tends toward definitely having a story and verbal components for sure. Like a lot more of that, I think.
I think it's just deciding whether you want to play on easy mode, medium mode, or difficult mode. It's like the less words you use, the fewer words. It gets a lot harder.
Yeah.
So did the filmmaking come out of the dance theater, or did you always kind of have that filmmaking bug, or was it just something you had to learn to do, for pragmatic reasons?
A little bit of all of the above. I was an actor for theater primarily for over 10 years, starting when I was like 12, 13, and I loved it. But at a certain point, I realized that I didn't want to be told what to do anymore. I wanted to tell people what to do, is what I always joke. And from there, I went to university for theater studies, and I focused on playwriting. And that was more out of a sense of familiarity. I felt like I could probably write the best for stage just because I knew it so well at that point. But I graduated in 2020 and I realized, this art form I've devoted the last 13, 14 years of my life to is suddenly dying a very, very quick death. So I should probably focus on something that is a little more sustainable, or at least feels more doable at this point. So I got a camera, and my fiance and I, we were in the same bubble with like three other roommates. So we started making shorts, dance shorts, and we basically just like kept making stuff, and we just never stopped. And from there, I realized that film was kind of the thing that I'd always been looking for and had always hoped for, but I guess I had just never thought to try, at least on the directing and writing side.
So it sounds like your movement from one art form to the other came out of necessity. And
Yeah,
um, I feel like a lot of people had to pivot during the pandemic
right.
and start finding other ways to create. Because a lot of people I know who did theater ended up feeling like their purpose was gone, you know?
Yeah.
Did you find that as well, that you kind of needed to find a new purpose?
You know, that's such an interesting way of phrasing it. I don't know that it was a loss of purpose, but more so a crystallization of what I realized my purpose actually was.
Mm.
It was a recontextualization, I guess you could say. I thought theater would be the end all be all for the rest of my life, and then I realized, oh no, it is one thing that I can do pretty well, but there are many other things that I can do and many other facets of my work that are unexplored at this point. So I should probably look at exploring them.
And how do you feel exploring the new avenues for your work? How do you feel like that has sort of opened up your world or your opportunities?
That's a great question. It has, I've never thought about that before. I think that it is, I don't know that it's changed really. It's just a different format.
Is it
I
just kind of like
still,
adding, like, or looking at it through like a different context, maybe?
well, it's like a different lens. I when I think of like writing and directing for stage versus writing and directing for film, it's really just a literal pulling out of focus and then going inward. So with stage, when you're directing for the stage, you're looking at the entire stage as a whole. It's not just what one person is doing. It's, oh, what's this person over here doing? Oh, they haven't been given something to do. I need to give them a prop or something, or I need to have some movement. You want the eye to always be focused, but you want to fill everything and have it be interesting always. Whereas with film, you can get a lot more precise with it. You can opt for the close up. You can pan to something else if something isn't quite capturing the eye. So it really is less so changing the way that I approach storytelling and more so just changing the form through which I tell my stories and the methods that I use.
Well, I
Well,
guess,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Billy.
oh, to clarify, I guess I'm wondering, I moved from stage to voiceover,
Yeah.
and in doing so, I kind of had to like let go of some things and I had to do some other things.
Hmm.
And I feel like doing so also opened my, if you want to say, talking about like wide view versus narrow view,
Yeah.
it opened my view towards like what possibilities were out there for me,
Mm.
in the world. Like just before, I was so focused on like, I have to audition for these companies. I audition for them every few months and I hope to get cast. And
Yeah.
in between, I'm doing my own thing, trying to like improve so that maybe I'll get cast. And I always felt a little boxed in. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden doing voiceover, I was like, there's so much more out there for me. Or even just thinking about creating my own work, there's so much more out there for me as a possibility that I didn't consider before when I was aiming for this narrow box. And so I guess that's kind of where I'm
Yeah. Okay. I see. I see.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when it came to so theater versus film for me, that transition, it was because theater is so much about like the next great American drama or the next great American musical. I felt like these stories that I wanted to tell were not, it's not that they weren't welcome. It was that if I wanted to tell them, I would have to kind of resign myself to only being in one kind of venue or only working with one or three theater companies that were interested in the kind of stuff that I wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
And that was difficult. And when I was focused solely on theater, I had kind of started to accept that. And I was like, okay, I may just be working out of like a basement for the rest of my career. And that's fine. I'll do that. I love it enough to do it. But pivoting to film, I realized, oh, there is an entire audience that likes horror and likes strange approaches to horror and might be interested in a more experimental view, at least early on when I started filmmaking. Um, and then from there, it's just been reaffirmed time and time again for me that like, oh, film is actually what I need to do because that is where the stories that I want to tell fit the best. Now, I'm not discounting going back to theater at some point if a basement will take me, but it's not the goal at this point.
I'm curious as far as like, staying with the transition, because they often say that, theater, I don't know if this applies to the dance theater because that's not something I've ever been a part of, but they often say that like theater is more of an actor's medium, whereas film is more of a director's medium. Like, was that something that kind of, I don't know, like how does that factor into your thought process as you're now going from the stage to the camera? Because what I'm sure when you was like, oh wait, I'm not having to focus on the wide view for the whole thing,
Hmm.
because like in theater you're just kind of laying it out there, and yeah, you can kind of block it out to where people kind of notice certain things, but with that camera you can get in there. I'm noticing even in your short film, like some like when I was watching one and just seeing like the different way you use the camera. I feel like the newer one definitely is like you were kind of getting in there and kind of really working the camera angles even more so, especially because I think it was the dance piece, the dance monster piece. I was
Hmm.
watching like kind of using it with the choreography and like, and plus, because there's also this long history of like, and like you talk about the great American musicals, there's this, so like in film, there's tons of examples of people taking, I guess that's something that would probably start out on stage and then moving it to the camera. So like, how is that, like you making that transition? Did you find it easy? Kind of like, cause now you're just like, oh, now I can just use the camera to direct your eyes exactly where I want to go. Or did you kind of have to change your like I'm saying, like
Yeah.
adapting to the other art form, or was
Yeah,
that?
no, it was not easy. It's really, really hard. But it was like it was a joyful hard work. It was like this is the hard work that I've chosen, so I kind of have to find some joy within it. Otherwise, why am I doing it? And for me, that transition was kind of like if I start with like experimental dance film making, then that's still pretty close to what I'm already accustomed to. Like even just with camera movements, like even if the camera is moving with the dancers, there's still such a wide view to capture all the choreography that it still felt similar enough to stage direction that it didn't feel insurmountably hard, which is important when you are making something in the year of 2020 and you are unsure whether anything will ever come of what you are making. And I think like with the most recent thing that I made, which is the pitch video, um, it was more like over the years, I've just grown more confident in making those like snap decisions. Like, no, this is the most important thing we need to see in this moment. We don't need a wide angle view of the garage that this woman is being kept in. We need to see her reaction to the garage, and we can glean what is happening from her. You know.
Well,
So I think it's
before we get too deep in that, I want you like
yeah,
let's give people like the people who haven't seen the pitch video.
yeah,
You
yeah,
shared it on our social, but like already, like so people who are watch this now might have already probably would have already seen it. So
yeah,
tell everybody about really quickly about this pitch video that you've got out there now as we're recording.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, by the way. Really appreciate it. It is so basically the video we are talking about is the pitch video for my Seed and Spark campaign for my short film, A Mother. The pitch video is the result of everyone telling me, don't make a boring pitch video. Do not sit in front of the camera and talk about your project. Like, actually make something. So to summarize, it starts with me as an actor, which I haven't done for a very long time, but me as an actor sitting in a garage, tied up, duct taped, with a bag over my head. And over the course of the next 5 minutes of the pitch video, I am talking to my captor about my project and why it matters to me and why it should be supported. And I don't know if I should spoil the ending, but it ends in a way you don't expect. Hopefully, you don't expect it.
Well, what I love is like you made a short film to pitch your short film.
Yeah. Well, the logic with that was like, as you noticed on my YouTube channel, a lot of my work that is out in the world is more experimental and dance based. And I wanted to show one that I could direct something more, traditionally narrative with close-ups and static and not as, movement heavy. But also I wanted to show that like I know how to tell a story and I can tell it in a way that is interesting and I can take a concept that people usually, kind of back away from, which is the pitch video. And people usually are like, oh, I don't want to watch your pitch video. That sounds really boring. And I can take that and make it into something that hopefully is interesting and unique and still shows off what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I like the idea that we didn't show the ending because then people can be like, oh, I want to see this now.
Yeah.
Keep them wanting more.
Keep them guessing.
Yeah. I mean, that's also why I, because like watching your stuff on YouTube and because like I saw the pitch video first is something that kind of came across, just, social. And I'm like, wow. Then I went and saw your stuff on YouTube. Like, okay, this is like night and day. Yeah. So like, this is somebody like this worth talking to. Cause I want to know like, how do you get from, dance, like little, mini musicals on YouTube to, this thing that looks like we're about to see some gnarly horror stuff.
So like,
it feels like there's a lot of room to explore between those two.
Right. Well, it's so funny that you guys are asking about those transitions and like, there's such good questions, but I truthfully have never really thought about it that way. It's just sort of like, to me, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like, of course I would want to move towards a more traditionally told narrative, like, of course, but yeah, on the outside thinking about it, it is a little bit of a jump and it's a little strange probably.
Well, let me ask, so you mentioned earlier how, you said something about there being an audience out there for the type of horror that is more experimental, that has a little weird to it, a lot of weird to it, right?
Yeah.
And I myself am a huge horror buff. I love horror movies, but I tend towards like giallo and other stuff that is
love giallo.
Very weird.
Yeah.
The movie Rubber, if anybody's seen that, like about a murderous tire that becomes sentient, like amazing, right? Like that type of stuff. That's extremely experimental. It's not a slasher flick. It's not, body horror. It's so cerebral and funny and amazing. But I'm wondering for you, what type of horror inspired you besides Jello you just mentioned, but like what, like if you could put up like one or two films that have really been like, ooh, that's what I would love to create. If I could create something, I aspire to create my thing somewhat in this realm.
The pinnacle for me is Ginger Snaps. Have you guys seen Ginger Snaps?
I have not, but I am aware of it. It's one of those like, sitting in my queue forever because it's like I know it's like I want to need to sit down and watch this one, but literally like almost anybody I know that's like into horror is always like that's one of the ones they point to. So
it is so fantastic for anyone who hasn't seen it. It is this tiny Canadian horror movie, and it's a creature feature. It has werewolves in it, and it's just. What I love about it and what I'm always like aspiring to do in my horror, especially in my screenwriting, is just how strange these characters are, but how real they feel. Like when you guys watch it, I'm going to say when you guys watch it, there are characters there that feel so odd and out of place, and you're like, what planet did you come from? But they fit perfectly within the story because they also are so specific that you're like, yeah, no, those oddballs are out there in the world and they absolutely exist. And I think that's what I'm always trying to capture with my screenwriting. And, I mean, there are so many. I love so many horror films. I love Nightmare on Elm Street, classic for a reason. So good. The Witch, always. Hereditary, modern classic to a T. The Blob 1988 remake. Is huge. So good.
Well, I just watched The Lighthouse, and again, because you mentioned The Witch by Robert Eggers, and like that's it feels almost like more because this is now normally I would say this as a knock. You say like there's a difference between having a premise and a story. I feel like they had a premise and they made an entire movie out of it. It kind of works in a weird, like disturbing kind of way where they're just like, okay, we've got this thing, and like it's like. I don't know what the screenplay looks like. I have to go track it down and read it because I've been like, I'm so fascinated with the movie because I'm like, what was the thinking behind all this? Because it's just it's one of those movies that feel like it's like an Eggers and just in particular he's one of these guys that's like real good about vibes. You know, like he's
Hmm.
just creating a
A
vibe, and that's kind
mood.
of what I
Yeah.
saw with your
Yep.
work is that it's now I know it's dance theater is a very different thing, but I also kind of like that if you can create that again, like Hereditary, where like you get a lot of it, and it's becoming more and more. I've noticed it people doing it more and more, like they're getting a lot more. I don't know what you would if you would even call this like pure cinema, where it's like it's just like you just show a lot without a lot of the talky stuff, but sometimes that
Hmm.
can, if you do it right, can be just really really effective.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any films that are like modern silent or almost silent films that you are interested in? I'm just curious if that's something that's coming up.
Yeah. Man, the first thing that came to mind, I don't even know where you would find it now, but about 10 years ago, I think I saw this film called Low, L-O exclamation point.
Mm.
And I don't know if anything ever happened with it. I don't even know how I got a hold of it, but it was like a modern vaudevillian take on traveling through hell. Um, it was just bizarre. And I think that's the closest thing I can think of to like a modern sort of silent film or like a silent film in general, I guess.
Interesting. I've not seen that one, but now I have
I
to
want to go
look
track
it
it
up.
down now.
Yeah, well now I'm like, what happened with that? Did that guy ever make anything else? It was just it was so weird, so delightfully weird.
Um, sorry, go on, Brandon.
No. Please, you sound like you already
I
had something. I was trying to like form a
Nope.
thought here because
No, same. My brain just went, nope.
I kind of briefly flashback to the lighthouse. Now my brain is going in weird places. I'm like, nope, come back, come
So
back.
good.
Yeah, I
But I
think
mean,
when we're talking about that style though, that type of the vibes, and having
Hmm.
like certain vibes, I think that can be really, really effective. Um, so how have you sort of developed your sort of filmic voice, if you will,
Hmm.
along the way? Or how do you, when you're starting a project, do you have in mind like, oh, I want it to feel like this, I want to do this with it? I'm curious what your process is like.
Yeah. I mean, for the last year, I've been very focused on screenwriting, so I've had to think about that quite a lot because my manager's first question is always like, well, what are the comps? What are the comparable titles here? What would you compare it to? Because that's what's going to get something sold nowadays. So a lot of the time, as soon as I come up with an idea, I have to start thinking like, is it like if blank meets blank? Or is it like if this and this had an unholy baby? Is that how I pitch it? Like that's kind of immediately how I start thinking about things now. Um, Before it was more, I would start writing, and along the way, I would find the tone and the mood and the vibe that I wanted to set. And then from there, I would dive deeper into that genre or subgenre in the case of horror and just try to get as many ideas going as possible based on other people's work, or inspired by other people's work. But now it is very much like, nope, immediately got to have something to hang my hat on genre wise or subgenre wise.
yeah, because I was curious as far as the writing goes. Because I mean, you've got a background already of trying to write for theater where there's not a lot of
Hmm.
words, and that the whole dialogue thing. Granted, there's certain people you kind of wish they were better at it, but it's also I have a lot of respect for directors who, like, if you watch a lot of like great, like a modern example, like the Dune movies, which
Yeah.
these really dense books. But one of the things I admired about the way Denis Villeneuve did it is that he parsed it down to kind of like this bare essence where you get lots of scenes where there's not a lot of dialogue.
Hmm.
It's just kind of you're just telling it through actions and what people are doing, or just like again creating that vibe. And if you know how to do that, that is just it's. I mean, was it the whole like picture worth 1,000 words kind of thing? Like you can, if you get good at that, like it's. I feel like that's like as a filmmaker, that kind of having that tool in your belt is priceless.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was William Friedkin who called those moments grace notes. They're not really adding to the story in terms of like building out context or anything, but they just visually tell you what you should be in for. And I definitely love those moments when I see them happen. And I love writing them. I just think they're so fun. And they really do set the tone very well.
Well, so that's well one of the things that why I found your style interesting is because I'm watching this stuff and I can see like how this would and maybe I don't know if you've thought about it or not, but like how you can transfer this around from different types of films or even if you want to do like even advertising or other kind of content. Like there's it's one of those things that like that being that kind of like having that economy with like the visual language
Hmm.
of film like it feels like that's one of those things like that's that ticket will get you anywhere if you know how to use it right.
I mean, let's hope. Fingers crossed. Yeah, I definitely think so. I definitely notice when I mean, even just looking at like directors who move from like music videos to films, like the Daniels, you can see very clearly that they are very confident, but they're also very, very good at wordless storytelling and just telling solely through visuals, which I think sometimes you see movies where it's like, oh, they were uncertain whether the audience would be able to tell what is happening, so they have to add in dialogue explaining. I mean, that's a common complaint nowadays. And I think with the Daniels, I never have that complaint. I'm always like, they just are like, get on the ride and try to stay on if you can.
Yeah, because I mean, well, the Daniels, and you also think it too, like a lot of great action movie, people have like backgrounds in dance.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah.
So I think just something about that again, being able to tell the story without the words. I mean, it's always
Hmm.
great if you have words, especially if they're good words. But I feel like, especially when it comes to film, like that other like I was just what because I was excuse me watched something recently where you're kind of like this is all right, but like man, you can kind of tell when a director doesn't have it. Like man,
Hmm.
it can just weigh a film down terribly when you get someone who doesn't know how to do the kind of the wordless storytelling. It like it because there's moments, and even in every film where it's action movies, sci-fi, horror, whatever, where you kind of like like especially like these last few years because I've been like binging, and you can
Hmm.
see those ones where they kind of don't have it, and it really it can just really take whatever momentum you've got in the film and just grind it to a halt.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know who
I agree.
oh,
Yeah.
so
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, who I think is really great at that is the French, like Jean-Pierre Jeunet,
Oh
um,
Yeah.
yes,
because or even the people who made Kung Fu Hustle. Like a lot of that is
Yeah.
silent um, character stuff that is so specific that you don't have to ask why something's happening, or eventually it'll get explained. But it's so character contingent and action contingent. It's not about needing. It's an economy of words.
Mm. Yeah, I would think I would say that Kung Fu Hustle, I should add that to the list of like modern silent vaudeville movies right there. Just all of the comedy is so good, even though there I rewatched it recently. There's like a shocking lack of dialogue for extended time in that movie,
Mhm.
and you still get everything, and the comedy is still there, and the action is still there, and you still know the characters. It's just I think it's just a different way of telling a story. And, I do think there is a difference between like American cinema versus foreign cinema. And you see that very much so in those moments where there is no dialogue and you have to solely rely on the visuals.
well yeah, the
Mhm.
French too are kind of big on like again we talk about vibes like they're
Hmm.
whole movies where it feels like they're just creating an atmosphere and then just kind of like exploring it.
Well, and it comes out of the physical theater tradition. I mean, Jacques Lecoq's school is in Paris.
Hmm.
Like that is their tradition, is physical theater with, no words or lack of very few words, right? So that's just a cultural thing, I think.
Yeah.
So you talk about like as far as like I'm curious like what plays or we've talked about your film background, but like what plays or what or whatever any kind of like works like what are those kind of things that have influenced you as far as like your work now?
Oh man. There's my all-time favorite play is called Reykjavik. It's by Steve Yockey. It is again very, very strange. It's I think it's 11 stories interwoven over the course of a couple days in Reykjavik, Iceland. And it has elements of horror. It has elements of it's a lot of magical realism as well. But then there's like these really, really heartbreaking moments of actual drama and heartbreak. And I love that play for that reason alone. It's just so strange and so unlike anything else in the theater canon, I think. Um, that's a big influence, or it was for when I was doing a lot of playwriting. In terms of theater, I honestly my first thought is back to the classics, like Shakespeare, of course, but then also Greek tragedies. I've
Mm.
always really enjoyed a good Greek tragedy. Like Agamemnon is huge for me. I think it's like the what I find so interesting about those is that like the stories, if you look at them, they're actually quite simple. Like if you lay them out beat by beat, it's not, you can add a little razzle dazzle and make it into a Wikipedia synopsis, but at the end of the day, it is just like, hey, this family's really messed up in this very specific way, and everyone dies at the end. And I think that they're a classic for a reason. I mean, we keep emulating that over and over again with like Hereditary. Like everyone's messed up in this very specific way. Everyone dies at the end. Sorry, spoilers for Hereditary, but that I think is so interesting is like a simple story told well. And I think that's been the biggest influence is like anytime I go into the outlining phase of anything, or anytime I even think about an idea and what it might look like or how it might shape out, I always give myself the note of like, I gotta simplify. I gotta simplify. It can't be overcomplicated. You can get complicated with the characters, but with the story itself, you do kind of have to keep it simple because I feel like those are the best stories.
Do you think it's really just about like setting the stage and then just allowing people room to play?
Yeah, well, I think especially with playwriting specifically, so much of playwriting is in the dialogue that you kind of have to create characters that are interesting enough and specific enough that actors can then build off of them. It feels very it feels at odds with itself in a way with playwriting because you want people to want to play your characters, but you also want them to be able to build their own iterations, especially if you're hoping for it to be done over and over and over again the way that Shakespeare is, right? So that's a skill that I would say has paid off in spades, at least on the filmmaking side, is this idea of like you want your characters to be interesting, you want people to want to play them, but you need them to be just general enough that anyone can put their spin on them and anyone can see themselves in them.
That is interesting because you think about Shakespeare and you don't think about Shakespeare as simple necessarily, you know?
No, well, that's the funny thing though, is that like if you look at Romeo and Juliet, even it's two teenagers fall in love with each other, their families don't like it, they die at the end. Like it's. But when you add in like the specificity of the characters and like the cousin relationships and the rivalries, and even you add in the nurse for Juliet and the friar, it suddenly becomes more than it initially appears because you have these very specific characters.
Yeah. When I was in college, there was a class that I wasn't actually in that I just heard. It was sort of legendary. It was not a directing class exactly, but they talked about
Mhm.
happenings and they talked about like boiling down the essence of the story. And it became a legendary thing because somebody came in and while professor was talking, the two people who were, they did Romeo and Juliet. So they had, as the professor's up there talking, giving his spiel at the beginning of class, men and women walk in, see each other, start making out, and then someone stands up, yells bang, and they both fall down dead. And they were like, end scene. And
Yeah,
and their professor was like, no, that wasn't your project. And they're like, yeah, it was. The point was disruption. Like
yeah.
you told us to do this, and the point was we're doing something that goes against what you're telling us to do.
Hmm.
And so they boiled down Romeo and Juliet to its absolute essence in that tiny
That's
little
so
thing.
fascinating. But I agree. I think they nailed their project. That absolutely fits the bill.
I
Mm-hmm.
like where it's like the or you see the films like describe a movie plot badly,
Oh,
where it's
Yeah.
like was it like was it Wizard of Oz? Like one girl goes out and like hunts down another girl because because she killed over some shoes. Or like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like just some like really epically bad, you know, or like get like a Star Wars Revenge of the Sith guy, goes out and slaughters a school full of children because he doesn't get a promotion, it's like stuff like that. Like,
See,
that
but then you take that and you set that in the modern day and you slap a different title on it, and that's the next A24 movie. Like it's that's what it is.
Yeah, and doing that, I love how when you're doing that though, you're putting a different frame on it, so it is almost going, well, what if it was from their point of view? You know,
Hmm.
what if it? I mean, Wicked is from
Wicked.
Elphaba's point of view, so
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that. One of my pilots recently had a little bit of competition success, and that one started because I wanted to tell a werewolf story, but I was having such a hard time coming up with like a good main character because like what has not been done before? It feels like, you got the teen girls, you got the cop, you got the, whatever. But so I started thinking like, who is the least likely person in this scenario? Like, who is the supporting character in every other story that should be the main character here? And what I landed on was the social worker, like the well-meaning social worker who like just really wants everyone to get along and just wants these kids to be all right. So I made him the main character, and it ended up being like some of the easiest writing I've ever had to do because I already knew who this guy was from every other movie I've seen.
that's really funny.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you because I look on your website. You had a few scripts that have kind of done very well in various festivals, and I know you're kind of still pretty early on in your career. What was it that kind of got you up to speed as far as like in the writing? Was it just having read a lot of plays, or did you also go out and read a lot of screenplays as well? Like what was it that kind of what do you feel
Yeah,
like you've kind of locked into something that seems to be working?
let's hope. Let's hope I can keep that momentum going. Um, I can be very honest here. I was not a good screenwriter for the first 2 years that I was trying it. From 2020 to 2022, I can say it. Garbage. Absolute garbage. It was just like it was too wordy. There weren't enough visual storytelling. It didn't feel cinematic. It was just bad. And I knew that. So from there, I was like, okay, I got to read a lot more scripts. I have to watch a lot more movies, and I have to talk to people who are doing the thing that I want to do, which is screenwriting. So I feel like a big turning point actually was going to the Austin Film Festival just as an attendee. I had something in the second round, but it wasn't high enough to justify like going to the parties or anything. So I went to Austin Film Festival and I just made it my goal to talk to as many people as possible who were where I wanted to be. So I spoke to a lot of panelists, and I don't know what it was. It may have just been like my wide-eyed earnestness about like, I really want to do this thing. Can I email you? But I ended up talking to a lot of people who were staffed writers and a lot of feature writers who had deals. And they were very, very kind, and they gave me their email and they said, like let's do a Zoom coffee. So I just started racking up Zoom coffees, and after a while, I just through hearing people talk about their process and their inspirations and how the industry works as a whole, I started to get better and better and better. And from there, I started to find my voice a lot more and realized that like I was splitting it a little bit too much. I was like trying to be a playwright and a screenwriter at the same time, and I just kind of had to go full throttle for screenwriting, and just improve in that one way. And I think from there, I started to see a lot more, traditional success with like competition wins or fellowships and things like that. But it really was just like harsh ego death and then trying to rebuild.
That's interesting because I heard from somebody who knows somebody else that was out west that that person had a bunch of screenplays, had some, but it was so hard to get the screenplays in, that he then I heard was turning them into novels
Yeah,
so that he could actually then just get them made because it was IP that people are looking
yeah.
for. And I was like,
Adapt your own IP.
what? So yeah, so that was interesting to me that you would end up doing that. But I have to think like, because I've had ideas before in the past where it's like, this could be a screenplay or it could be a play. And I could see it
Hmm.
being both, but it could be totally different. Um,
Yeah,
do you have ideas like that you're like, I want to kind of do this both, but I want to do it in different ways?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the question of like what something should be is so dependent on the idea itself. Like if you're writing something that is like so contained that it could be done with two people in a single room, yeah, maybe it is a play. It might be, but it also, I've seen plenty of contained movies that are wonderful and should absolutely have been films. I think it's just a vibe check kind of thing, as unhelpful as that is. It really is just like a gut decision. Like, what is this? Um, for me, though, I feel like, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I feel like I can immediately tell when I'm watching a movie that started as a play because it's missing the propulsion that I think a lot of films have, even if they are contained. It's like there's just not enough happening to warrant a film adaptation. And that doesn't mean that like the play is bad. It just means that like, oh, this is very much like a character study in a contained room.
August Osage
Yeah.
County.
Yeah, I would say that. I would say The Whale as well. I personally enjoyed it a lot more
Mm.
as a play.
I've only seen the play version of it, actually.
It's so interesting. It is, but also like that's because, in my opinion, the whole premise of this like morbidly obese man, it is so much more visceral when you are face to face with an actor doing that and embodying that character. Brendan Fraser did an amazing job. I will never take that away from him. But to me, it was just a little bit more interesting seeing it in person and seeing an actor actually physically struggle through having all of this weight and in person and having that experience
Well, I think
versus
too is
seeing it on a screen.
well, wouldn't it? I guess like in person because you have to watch them physically get up from that chair and then walk down.
Yeah.
And they do that in the film, but I think it's again, I think they did as good a job as can be done. I haven't seen the play, but
Yeah.
I can visualize like I think it's I guess just that empathetic part of your brain really kicking in. But I was also thinking like of there've been so many other films or that have started as plays, and I feel like though in the successful ones, it's like they seem to always like you have this like you're talking about that sense of propulsion. I'm thinking of the ones that work. I'm thinking like Rent. I keep thinking about like that one. Like I was just thinking about like all the just how the camera is just constantly moving, and it's just like the visual language of it is just go like just the open of it is just go.
Wait,
Even when you start,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Billy.
Are you saying you like Rent as a movie?
I know I do. Yeah, because I'm just saying like I think about it's like I don't know I've never seen it on the stage, but I'm just like what about you, Billy?
I think it's so much better on stage.
I'm like saying having not seen it on stage, I can't see that, but I can appreciate like from as someone who likes movies that like it feels like they knew like when they had to go to time to make the movies, like, okay, we have to make this thing move. It's because you're not just sitting in the room and like, okay, I have this one place to look.
I mean, I just personally feel like I love musicals, but like Phantom, Les Mis, it's like they're fine. I like parts of them as movies. There's the visceral thing that you miss when you don't have the vibrations of people singing, of like this whole crowd of people singing at you in a room. You know, I sobbed through like the second half of Rent the first time I saw it because I was fourth row center and could see the people tearing up themselves. I could see their sweat. I could see, I could feel their emotions. It's just not the same when you.
Well, no, I think it never will be though, because I think it's such a different animal being in the room with somebody versus just looking at everything through a screen. But I think it's interesting to me. That's why I'm kind of fascinated with the art of the translation. Like, how do you work for that?
But I
think like.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to throw out there because, we're talking with Zoe who does physical theater, and like from the physical theater I've done, so much of it is about the collective. It's about breathing with the other people, feeling their energy. You're almost breathing in sync as one organism. And so you lose that when you're like on stage, you have that. You're all in sync. You're all doing things together. In the best productions, that's how it is. When you have the movie thing, when you were saying it's a director's medium as opposed to actor's medium, what to me that really means is the director chooses the best take, and it's not necessarily that actor's best take or that actor's best take. It might be this one actor's best take, and it's just the one best take overall. But that means that you might be missing something in some other areas. It's just what had to be done because we can't take infinite takes until everybody gets that much better or that perfect, right? So to me, it's like, but in the theater, it's the actor's medium in the sense of it's also the collective medium. It's not about this one person choosing this take over that take. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. I'm not sure that I 100% agree because with theater, I mean, I was a theater actor for a while. I never really felt like it was an actor's medium, even when I was doing it. It felt very much like, as you said, it's the collective's medium. And that
Mm-hmm.
collective did include the director and the set designer
Mm-hmm.
and the costume designer, everyone who's involved. It's everyone together. And in the same way that, some actors get, sorry, the better role that is just like a little meatier, and then that show becomes theirs. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think it's the same with film where, you hear about like, oh, they stole the show, or like that was their breakout role. And it's because they just had something there and it isn't anticipated. No one could have foreseen it.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. Um, and I think that's really interesting.
I guess for me, it's the difference between though doing, say, either fully scripted theater where it is like I was
Mhm.
told to go stand there, and then I was told to go do this, and I was told to go do
Right.
that, and I'm doing what I was told, and I'm a puppet, versus doing devised theater and really creating something together as a group, um, and really feeling that collective energy and feeling the group mind thing that has been
Mhm.
that I've experienced that to be kind of magical. Even in shows that were partly scripted and partly devised, like it's a
Yeah.
little magical.
I
Um,
would agree with that, especially immersive theater. It's just always, it really is alive and always changing, which makes it so special, but also it can be to the detriment because after a while, if you have a longer run, things can kind of go off the rails and then you need someone to step in and be like, okay, actually, we do need to rein it in just a little bit. But yeah, I would agree with that.
yeah, because I agree with you. Like just doing straight up plays, sometimes, yeah, the director is literally put you in as a puppet
Yeah.
and you're in a costume that is uncomfortable and a girdle underneath it.
Hmm.
And you're just like, I don't feel like I have any ownership of this character at all. Right.
Yeah. I did extra work in New York, I think 2 years ago, and that is the closest I've ever come to feeling like a theater actor on film because it
Mm.
really is like uber marionette. You go here, you wear this, do this at exactly when I say, and if you don't, you're out of here.
And do you think maybe that's just I don't know, since I haven't done it as much as I use it, maybe just a side effect of just like a certain director's style? Because I know that there's certain directors where they look at the actors again like puppets. Like I'm going to tell you to do A, B, and C, and you do A, B, and C at this exact time. Versus others who might, again, give you that room to play. Like, what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Coming from an actor's standpoint, it is so dependent on the project and the role and the director. Like I have worked with directors who were absolute tyrants that I would work with 100 times over and over again because their vision was so clear and I believed in the project and the director so much that it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It didn't feel like I wasn't an artist. It felt like I was serving a larger purpose within the story. And then I worked with directors who gave me complete free rein, and I would never talk to them again because they were just like, it was like they were so hands off that I didn't know what I was doing. There were performances with these directors I'm thinking of where I would walk off stage after doing closing bows, and I would think, I don't remember the last 2 hours because I just was out there doing whatever I felt. And I don't know if it was good or bad. I have no idea. So yeah, all that to say, it's a complete toss up.
Yeah.
So as we're coming up, getting closer and closer to the hour mark, tell the people out there where they can find you online if they want to at you or learn more about what you do.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and Twitter at I am Zoe Kerr, IAMZOEKERR. I don't know when this is going up, but we also have a Seed and Spark campaign for my short film, A Mother, that is running until August 31st. And you can find me on my website as well, zoekerr.com.
Awesome. It was so nice to chat with you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on social media at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. To learn more about the show, visit scratchclawpush.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for the use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2024 by Carcutta Media LLC, all rights reserved.